Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for our webcast today, titled Protect Profits with Best Practice Approaches to Change Order Management. Our speaker today will be Pat Reitz, B2W Software's Product Manager for B2W Estimate. He will be joined by a panel of industry experts on change order management, and I will turn it over to Pat to introduce today's panel.
Hi, folks. My name is Pat Reitz. I'm the B2W Software's Estimate Product Manager, so I've been in charge of the Estimate program now for 11 years. Wanted to start off by introducing our panelists. To begin with, we've got Allison Lanzi. She's a contract manager at Lancaster Development. I'd like to have Allison talk a little bit about Lancaster and the work that she does there.
Hi, my name's Allison. Being a contract manager, we work with a lot of DOT heavy highway projects. We've used the B2W platform for 7 years now. I've been involved with most of the estimate and track portion of it. And working with DOT, we do a lot of work with the change orders and additions to contracts. So this change order implementation is fantastic.
Next up, we've got Allan Day. He's the Director of Estimating and Preconstruction at Brubacher. Allan, if you could tell us a little bit about Brubacher and what you do.
Sure. Good afternoon, or I guess depending what part of the country, and good morning. So yeah, I've been with Brubacher Excavating for 13 years, and we've used B2W products since long before that. But we do use estimate, track, maintain, and schedule. So we use almost the full platform. But we're a full service site contractor, site development, doing everything from survey and land clearing all the way through mass grading, utility installation, paving as well. So that's a little bit about Brubacher and my role there. I lead our sales and estimating team.
Excellent. Next up, we've got Rob Slauson. He's the Senior Estimator Project Manager for Fiore and Sons. Rob, if you could fill us in on Fiore and what you do.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, like Pat said, Rob Slauson with Fiore and Sons, Senior Estimator, Part-Time Project Manager. We made the switch to the B2W projects about 1.5 years ago. I've used in total estimate for probably close to 15 years now. We're primarily a heavy civil contractor, large earthwork jobs, wet utilities. We also do civil GC work where we will manage all of the civil work outside of the building. We'll do, we'll have asphalt subcontractors under us, concrete subs. Yeah, we do a lot of private work. So in that avenue, there is a lot of change orders to manage, as there's always plan changes, development changes as we go through the project. So yeah, change order management is a big issue, hot button for us out here in Denver.
Excellent. And we've got Shea Wiemann, Director of Operations at Geeding Construction. Shea, if you'd tell us a little about Geeding and your role.
Yep. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shea Wiemann with Geeding Construction, and we're a pipeline maintenance contractor. We do mostly maintenance work. We'll install new HDDs or horizontal directional drills. We do a lot of that stuff, some stuff in stations, but mostly mechanical. I'm in charge of the project management side of things and estimating. And we've just kind of recently, we've been on B2W Estimate now for 3.5, 4 years, but I came from heavy highway and used it previous then. So I've been using it for 12, 13 years. So great software. I look forward to talking about change orders.
Excellent. Well, that rolls in kind of nicely to change orders. So the reason that we're focused on change orders here is because of the impact they can have on a project overall. Just some statistics we found was that on average, they account for about 18 to 14% of infrastructure construction projects, which when you consider what the typical margins are, that's a pretty fair portion, and they can run much higher than that sometimes. Without an efficient management process, your contract values can just be completely shot. You can have project timeline overruns, and you can have productivity losses. So what I wanted to do is give our panelists a chance to weigh in on what kind of impacts they've seen. How far off the rails have they seen projects go, and how important has it been to manage change orders well?
I think this is Shea. Throughout the course of the project, I mean, it's just we've had a couple here recently actually that have just completely been almost redesigns coming out of in our industry. We don't always know what's in the ground. The pipelines have been in the ground for 60, 70, 80 years sometimes, and they don't know, and it's just coming into it. They have a set of plans that come out to you, and you bid it a certain way, and then you get out there and you're sitting there digging up where this new line is going to be, and you run into an old existing line or old foundation, and it doesn't only add hours, it potentially adds days, weeks, depending on what the scope change is. And just tracking this stuff is just, it's been in the past, it's just been a nightmare for us with all the just Excel or putting it on paper and just document tracking and all that kind of stuff. It's so imperative that you have good documentation and bring it up front to the customer. But we've had a project that actually completely had to redesign it because of the initial design was so far off from what the actual design needed to be that it changed order literally from the start of the project. We started it was at HDD and turned around and they redesigned the whole thing and started it over, and it was all based on change order, 100% change order.
So basically an entirely new project that was 100% change order driven.
Yes, correct.
So this is Allan. I think one of the most critical things that sometimes gets overlooked in change orders is capturing your indirect or your general conditions costs. You got to make sure that when you're going through change orders, sometimes you are stuck with whatever your contracted unit prices or lump sum prices are. But in other cases where you have the opportunity to make adjustments, you want to make sure that you are capturing your general conditions. So your supervision, your project management, site stakeout are some of the things that stick out for Brubacher. And so, yeah, I think that's definitely something worth making sure you're capturing that.
Makes sense.
Yeah, Allan, that's a good point, and this is Rob from Fiore. Yeah, that's especially a good point when you're spreading your indirects and GCs on your original bid, and you get a change order that is just adding work that's similar or different, and now you've got to recoup those GCs when they were buried in your original bid pricing. So that just becomes another conversation you have with the client to make sure that you are recouping those additional costs as the project grows and changes.
I think everyone's made really good points about change orders are such a big part of any project and it's additional work and it's the ability to make extra money. So with the indirects, the tracking of the change orders and the changes in the project, it's such a huge part of this.
That kind of segues nicely into the next topic I had for us, and that's basically managing change orders. For those of you who've had to do it without a tool that's dedicated to it, what kind of challenges have you faced there? For instance, trying to use spreadsheets versus a dedicated software solution, what kind of headaches do you run into?
This is Shea. We've been a primarily T&M contractor over the last, pretty much the course of the company. I've been here for 5.5 years, and even in this time, we're seeing our industry switch more to the hard bid side of things. And obviously you definitely have more risk when you're at hard bid versus T&M. And it's just kind of been a mindset of a shift of the way we've had to review how we do project management, and just it's definitely a different focus now. We've actually transitioned from cost tracking and from a little bit of cost tracking and project controls that we've had We've done that in Excel, and there's been very limited of that. And now in the last year, we've implemented within our ERP, and part of that ERP is change management and change orders and all that. But it's very cumbersome to input the data and to track it in there. Mainly the data input, it's cumbersome. I mean, I don't know what everybody's ERPs are, but ours, it takes a lot of time, and it's not something that we're sitting there familiar with on the project management side of things. Where within B2W estimate, we're constantly in there, every day, if not multiple times a day or all day long. But with the new change order, we're able to sit there, export all our cost types into the system, and it has definitely streamlined that process of taking less time to do it and making it more accurate, making sure all your cost is actually hitting that job in the ERP to make sure you can track against it, and also putting that contract item in there. Before we switched over to B2W, it was just strictly a heavily macroed Excel estimating sheet that didn't allow for a lot of changes once you made the sheet. And you wanted to go in there and make a change order, you sit there and you have to start over from the blank sheet. Well, now with estimate, you hit the button with B2W, the estimate, you hit the change order button, and it's already in that bid. So all your crews are already populated in there. You can just copy that crew down, and your rates are already in there, and all that stuff's, all your items and costs are already in there. So it's been definitely a big time saver. And like I said, the big thing is a familiarity with the project managers within B2W versus our ERP is just it's a huge difference. And the easier it is for the PMs in the field to get that information in and create that information, the more apt they are to actually make that happen. And that's the first start. So that's where we've seen it. That
makes a lot of sense. One of the things I heard talking to people about the need for change orders was tied in with that. It was people saying the ERP tools that we have, or the accounting tools that we're being asked to use to manage our change orders, they're things our accountants use. Accountants think like accountants. We think like estimators. Could you give us something in our estimating tool that will do our estimating for us?
Yeah, I've found one of the challenges that I've always had is just the redundancy you had to use to manage change orders. You're pricing it up in your estimating software, then you've got an Excel spreadsheet log going on to track, which change orders are approved, which are rejected. And then we're also using Excel to actually generate the change order request that we would send to the client. The B2W change order module is just kind of taking one of those steps out where we can just send the actual request to the client right through the software. Yeah, and like everybody else said, it's just nice to be able to price the change order as its own little module inside your original estimate, and have indirects and GCs that spread just to the items that are specific to that change order. It has really streamlined the process on our side.
That's fantastic to hear.
And to add to that too, Pat, it's one of those things too, when you're estimating in Excel, in Excel, or putting your change order to Excel spreadsheet. At least we have this problem here: is people have a tendency to save them on their desktop. Well, as director of operations, I can't see it. So to have one central place to go see what they did with it, it makes it. I'm not sitting here emailing and knocking on doors trying to figure out where all this stuff is, and it's in one centralized place. Yep. It makes it nice.
I know from talking with a few of you before, you've mentioned it's not just one or two change orders for projects. Some of them, the one you were talking about, I think, for redesigning the whole project, it was what someone was saying, like 98 or 100 change orders for a project. That'd be a lot of Excel spreadsheets to track down, I imagine.
Yeah, I just had one project manager. I was showing him it today, and he started this project 2 weeks ago. He's already up to 9. I mean, obviously some of them they're not major, but he's already up to 9, and it's handy.
Yep. So that kind of leads us into our next one, which is basically the ability to use real field data for change orders. For folks who have a tracker, for anybody who's getting the actuals, one of the things that had come up in conversation was the benefit to being able to bring your actual production rates or bring your actual crew compositions back to the estimate and use that to generate the costing for your change orders going forward.
This is something our company uses as I build prices for most every project we work on. So some of the projects I might not be dedicated to. So the ability to go into track and see what the production rates were and how they actually did man hour per units, and take that information now that I'm allowed to renegotiate and account for it properly. Because with an estimate, it's just an estimate. We might not be able to beat that, or we might beat it. But in the cases where we haven't, I can make up for that. And I can see that we didn't meet it and we needed to adjust it accordingly. I have to say, I think that's been such a beneficial factor of the track back to the estimate for the change order. And then I can take the other thing I really liked about the change orders. We get existing items. Once it hits a certain point, then we can renegotiate. I can take the existing one and then adjust it for what actually took place. So timeline, it's much faster just being able to copy the existing one and change crews, add, adjust for whatever's necessary.
Yep. This is mostly a curiosity on my part, but are you able to make up shortfalls? Like, let's say you bid an item and the crew had a production rate of 100 tons a day or something, and then you find that they're actually producing at like 50. Obviously, any further bidding you do, you could bid out at 50, but are you able to make up the shortfall that the original item is having, or do you just account for that in the markup on the items or something along those lines?
So with working with New York State DOT, and I actually just finished doing this. We did an asphalt item. When it meets a certain percentage for the DOT spec, we're allowed to renegotiate. So we were doing lower than what we had thought. I was able to take so much of the quantity. So you've got to, take the hit for up to the certain amount. Mm-hmm. But for the remaining amount, I was able to make up for the slower production and submit a higher price to gain back.
Oh, that's fantastic. So where you would have been taking potentially a bath on the item, you're able to at least get back to your break-even rates.
Break even, or we try to do better, but
Yep.
If you can get break even, that's always good. But it's so handy to have the information there. And we break down track into a lot of different tasks, and that allows me even more detail. And the detail of that too, to have that, so if anyone questions how I built my price, I can show them and say it's from actual information. This is real production rates.
So are production rates the primary tool that comes back from the field, or are there other pieces of information that are useful to have too?
A lot of it's the production rates. The other, with your crew and your equipment, you might see that they use something completely different from what we estimated. They might have figured for a certain excavator and we use, 2 smaller ones, or a loader instead. So you will see different crew components. They might have figured 1 labor, we use 2. So you get to see all that information, and it's so easy to access.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, I think that information from track isn't just valuable for change orders, but also valuable for future estimates as well. Just having the ability to mine out that real-time information from historical projects is a huge asset.
I agree with that as well. And with the change orders, when you introduce new items or different items of work that you don't normally bid on, you push it over to track and you actually see what it took. So you have that history as well for different types of work.
Out of curiosity, how often do you wind up getting change orders for work that wasn't in the original bid, but where you may be able to pull something from the field of, okay, they hadn't asked us to do this, but based on what we're seeing in the field, I can make a better guess about it?
Quite a bit. Quite a bit. Working with all the different projects I do, we introduce new items to work a lot. Some will be based off of time and material. So that is what it is, and you get your overhead and profit on it. But some of it's you see it before you're going to do it, and you can work up the price and build a new item, and then you send it over to track. You know, the change order is introduced, it's approved, and you send it over to track, and it allows you to see how you did on it, because it's an estimate again.
Mm-hmm. It feels like it's a good teaching tool for estimators as well. You know, by being able to bring the real information back, you can say, oh, you know, we're consistently estimating with these values, but really we should be using these other ones because that's what we're really getting.
Yes, and our company focuses a lot of detail on the different tasks built into each separate item. And depending on the project, you know, if it's something we haven't worked with before, we'll pay a lot of, we make sure that we really want that item track, that task, so we can see what it cost us, because we're not familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
And it allows us for the future to be, okay, on this project, let's go back and see how we did. What did it take?
Yeah, the first one may be a thumb in the wind, but after that, you've got real data to draw on. Okay. Moving on to the next topic, unless anyone's got some other thoughts on real field data. We had talked about T&M change orders a bit, and there's some pitfalls with that. One of the things that got brought up already is the idea of handling your indirect costs, that it's easy to miss that when working out what your T&M rates should be. I think, Allan, you'd mentioned having some experience with that?
Yeah, so I think I touched on that earlier. It's actually, I guess, easier to miss your indirect costs when you're doing things on a time and materials basis, and therefore it's important to make sure that you kind of have some way to capture that in whatever your time and materials rates are. It's certainly easier to recover those when you're doing things on a lump sum or a unit price basis, because you can kind of bake that into whatever those costs are for your extra work. We've had mixed experiences on whether we can bill for general conditions on T&M change orders, and it's hit or miss on whether or not we can negotiate that with contractors or customers. But yeah, one thing around the topic of T&M changers that I thought might be of some interest to some people would be that we actually established an item database that has all of our published T&M rates preloaded, so that whenever we're converting something from T&M signed off paperwork to a lump sum change order, we can just add those items from that database into an estimate. All you have to do is plug in quantities. The rates are already public, or the rates are already set, and in a matter of a couple of minutes, you have everything converted. So that's not quite on the topic of recovering indirect costs, but just a little tidbit of information on how we handle some of those.
That seems like it'd be a nice time savings too. You don't have to figure stuff out from scratch each time.
It is.
For the contracts where you can't negotiate the indirect costs or the overhead costs, are you able to roll those kind of just in with your markup on the items themselves, or do you have to handle it in some other way?
Yeah, we try to just offset that by a slightly higher markup on our rates for that project to make sure that we are able to recover those costs, because that does add up. when you have supervision or project management time, office time, accounting time, it actually takes, excuse me, more time in some cases to build T&M work as opposed to lump sum work. And so you also got to think about recovering your office time. Even though it's overhead, it's still a cost of doing the business.
Yeah. Yep. And for the projects where you can negotiate it, do those just show up as their own line items that get paid out, or how is that handled?
Yeah, we've never been successful at really billing our accounting team for the extra time for billing. It's just something I wanted to mention there. But as far as the project management supervision, yes, we just do bill them as line items for the project supervisor, project manager, and project engineer.
That makes sense. And like permits and fees are handled separately?
Generally, in our market, we're not worried about permits and fees because the owner is usually handling those directly.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's one less headache, one less negotiation.
Okay. Anyone else have thoughts on handling time and material with change orders? Otherwise, I will move on to our next topic. Which is, a sec. Oops. Creating timely change orders and the impact of delaying a change order. I think, Rob, you'd had some experience with having contract requirements on how soon change orders need to be done. Did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so I think most people see that there's usually a clause in the contract that, if you're issued a work directive by the client to proceed on a T&M basis, you have so many days to turn around that change order and get a price back to them. Typically I've seen 7 days that you need to have something back to them, or they can basically say you're not adhering to your contract and we have no obligation to pay you for that. So that is, I think it's probably an issue for everybody, is getting that information back from the field, what equipment was used, what hours it took to get that work, and getting it priced up and turned around and back to the client so they know their cost. And a lot of clients will work with you on that. Sometimes you've got subcontracted trucking or lease trucking. You don't always get their cost back in a timely manner, or materials are involved. And it's just I think the quicker you can get the information back of what it costs them to do this extra work, memories are fresher. If you're waiting 30 days to get a T&M change order back to your client, a lot of people will conveniently forget why that work was needed, and you end up, reducing your T&M change order, because they disagree with it, because their memories have now changed and the facts have changed. So I just think anything you can do to get the pricing back to them faster is gonna help you recoup those costs, plus make more money on that T&M work that you had to do.
I imagine that helps with cash flow too, right? Where the sooner you get the change order to them, especially if it's happening after the work is done, does that lead you to being able to bill them out sooner so that the cash keeps coming in at a nice rate?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you could be carrying T&M costs on your job for 7-8 weeks. Unfortunately, a lot of times the billing side of it is delayed from the owner's side, that they have not approved your change order, so you can't bill for them until they have. Yep. But obviously, if you can get them the cost back faster, hopefully that results in faster approval on your change order work, which then, helps your cash flow as well. You don't want to bankroll their project for them.
Yeah, this is not charity work. Do most or a lot of the jobs for you folks in general go that way, where you'll do the work first and then submit the change order for it, or does it sometimes happen in the reverse order where until the owner approves the change order, the work doesn't happen?
This is Rob again. For us, it happens both ways. I mean, we might get a field directive from the superintendent on the job to proceed, and we have them sign that change order request, which gives us approval to move forward. That's typically for, unforeseen changes that happen, which happens a lot when you're doing civil work with underground utilities and dirt and changing weathers. But we also do it the other way. If we know something is going to have to be changed, we'll try and get pricing to them ahead of time and get approval before the work starts. That's always the better way. It just doesn't always happen that way.
Yeah,
I think it all depends on how the scope is. Like if you have a well-defined scope and how accurate you can get your estimate put together, change order cost put together versus, if you have that beforehand, then it's a little easier and less risk going into it than in providing a number up front versus going into a high risk change order and you don't really know what you're going to get into, and then putting that cost out there, the price out there after the fact.
I know as our company works, we've hit a project where it felt like we bankrolled the entire project because they took so long to process our change orders that we really try to steer clear of that, and anything that's added has to be approved and ready for payment before we'll even do the work.
And that's got downsides itself, obviously, of now you're kind of
Time delays.
Yeah, you're stuck in, crew that could be doing something is waiting on a paper to be signed.
It's a tricky situation.
I imagine owners are really happy when work gets delayed too, and they've got to make a decision before it'll go forward instead of it just happening and they can deal with it after when they've forgotten everything.
Yes.
One other thing that I wanted to mention around timely change orders at Brubacher, one thing that we worked with B2W on is to create a custom report and track, specifically around doing T&M work, and it actually expedites things a little bit on our end. That it actually pulls the hours right out of our daily track log, and then we're able to get the customer to sign off on that in relatively short order and then convert that then to a change order. So that's something that B2W was able to help us with, keeping things not only moving, but also organized there.
That's something that we do fairly commonly too. We've got a team that handles custom reports for folks. And it's something you'll work with them on for, how big the report is, how long it's going to take, and they can kind of form fit the report to what your needs are. And if it's a report that we think everybody needs, then we try to include it as a standard report. We did touch on something there that segues nicely into the next slide, the next topic though. And that's the idea of pre-building change orders. This was something that came up while I was talking to folks, talking to you folks prior to this, but also originally when we were designing the feature, the idea that not all change orders are made like during the project work. Some of them get made right when the project is being estimated in the first place. Some people spoke of they'll go over the contract and they'll look for what's missing in it and say, well, that's definitely going to be work that has to be done. So let's create a change order for it right up front. And that way we'll know what the true scope of the project is going to be. Am I looking at something that's being bid out at $2 million, but realistically this thing's going to be $3 million after we do all the stuff that they forgot to include in it, which can kind of change how you go for certain things. And I think I think I remember Allison and Shea had run into this of doing change orders before or like while estimating the project.
I think if you have the opportunity, oh, sorry, Shay, you can go ahead.
No, go ahead, Allison.
So in this situation where you do find something like that and you can start building the change order, it allows you to see the price and, like you said, the additional cost, but it also allows for when the project goes, the quicker process of a change order to get the money in place before the work's even done. And you already have crews set up and ideas of how you're going to do it. It's beneficial.
No, I would agree with that on Allison's part. And I mean, and we try to be upfront with our clients as soon as we see something like this, and you have those discussions up front, and it makes it, number one, the relationships better. And I just think it helps get you an overall team feel with everybody on the same page. And it allows you to come up with a solution off the bat, and hopefully gives the owner time to figure out what direction they want to go, how they want to mitigate the issue, and make sure it's done correctly in the way they want it done, instead of waiting to the last moment and bringing it up at the very end, and everybody's in a scramble, which we all know how that goes.
Some people had mentioned it being better to have the information up front too for things like scheduling and resource allocation, that if you know this project is really going to take an extra month and your equipment's going to be there for an extra month, then you can handle the scheduling of it a lot better, because you're not pulling in a rental to cover because this piece of equipment needs to go off to some other job site.
I would agree with that. You'll sit there in the middle of the summer and you got a bid that you're working on a bid, and you got it hitting this fall, and you're not having any projects and no irons sitting in the yard to do it. It definitely is a huge driving factor on what's required and personnel when you're in the midst of busy time. Definitely helps to predict that stuff and make sure you have resources allocated to cover it.
I agree with that too. I mean, height of the season, multiple projects, and everyone wants every piece of equipment and every crew member.
With that raises a question of when it's work that you didn't have planned for, how disruptive can that wind up being? Like, what do you do if this project needs to keep this crew on it, but that crew is really needed for another project next week, and like they can't be in two places at once? Do you just that's a scheduling conflict and you got to work it out like that? Or is there something, is that a reason that you'd wind up charging more for the change order because you're sort of putting a premium on that crew's time?
In the past, we've always tried to make it work and pull, as long as we have some extra personnel on another project, we'll move them around accordingly if it's not a major project. With our industry, we run into it a lot where there's possible where there's a leak or something like that with the pipeline, and when that happens, you're scrambling trying to figure out how to get people over there to help, because it is an environmental issue and hazard, health and safety. So you're trying to get everybody over there as much as you can to help out, but you may be busy, and it's just, where can you pull from and to make it work the best you can. And we are union contractors, so we pull some from the hall, but then you lack experience in that. So it's definitely a case by case situation, but it is definitely a point of emphasis that is tough to do and manage. Every year we have the same issue. How can we better schedule and do this kind of stuff? But you never know what's going to happen, and something like that happens, or you have a change order where you need to go over there and do the work, and it's rob Peter to pay Paul. tough sometimes.
Yeah,
Not really a good answer on it.
yeah, it seems like that's just an intrinsically hard part of the job. It's there is no good answer. You just hope to have enough information to make the best of what you can out of what you've got. So any general thoughts on change orders that any of the panelists would like to share? I've got a couple notes on how we're doing an estimate today that I can get into, but if you have any additional thoughts on challenges with change orders or things that make it easier?
I always go back to the in college. I'll never forget my contracts professor always. He showed a picture, and it was a little dinghy that called original contract, and then the yacht was called change order. It's always been stuck in my mind. So I'm sure most of us have seen that, but it's not always true. But it definitely, change orders are definitely a vital point of the vital process that you have to have in order to make, it'll make or break a job, keep you in the black or make you go in the red, depending on what you got going on with it. So they're definitely a very, very important piece of the puzzle to make sure you're tracking and managing them as close as you can.
Something that I wanted to mention, Pat, and I think we talked about this earlier, was around doing credit change orders. At Brubacher, we have our estimators are kind of disconnected from the project once it goes into construction. And so our project engineers or assistant project managers are doing 95% of the change orders. And so when we're doing credits, you want to make sure that you're at least thinking about or having a conversation around the number you're crediting back as it relates to the original contract and any indirect costs that are buried in that item. And so, indirect cost is something that I drive home pretty hard, as you might have picked up on me touching on that a few times during this discussion. But it is important to try and, if you're able to negotiate with your owner, let's say you're selling a cubic yard of dirt for $3.50 of that is indirect costs, and you need to credit back several thousand cubic yards for one reason or another, and you're basically losing out that budget then for some of your general conditions. If at all possible, you want to have that conversation with the owner and say, well, I understand my contract unit price was $3, but I really only can credit back to you $2.50 because of my general conditions costs.
Right.
But just something to be mindful about as people are working on change orders, specifically as it relates to credits.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Basically, you're saying I have these costs that I'm going to be incurring regardless of the fact that this work isn't, that I'm doing less quantity here. So I can't really give you back that cost because it's really already spent. My scheduler still had to be there to schedule this work out. I've got to cover their salary.
That's correct. Yeah.
Any other thoughts from the panel? Okay, well, I'll jump into real quick change orders and estimate. So this is the largest single feature that we've done since I've gotten here, at least, which is 11 years now. Basically, we kind of reconceived what an estimate is. So for those of you who haven't seen 20.1 yet, which is the version that introduced it, change orders are treated almost as estimates within an estimate. And I'll pull up the application to show you what it looks like in a moment. But the short form is they're full-featured estimate blocks, and the whole project gets collected together. So for a change order, you've got pay items and indirect items and cost groups and workbooks and everything that you would find in an estimate. You've even got the ability to do cost and pricing as though it were a full estimate. So you can bring all of those pieces together and see what the project looks like as a whole. And just to give you a quick sense of it, you get them, you can see here is the estimate detail tree. You can see There's special nodes once you add change orders for each change order, which has its own copy of pay items and direct items. You can see over here, you can do pricing, profit and overhead, unique to each particular change order. Yeah, maybe for your original bid, you had a very complicated markup structure, and then for the change order, you wanted to just say, I'll just take 15%, or I'll just take 20%, or give me an extra 100,000 in profit for this. We'll call it even, whatever that is. You can also see a summary of, well, what do those numbers mean for the change order, and what does that mean as part of the overall project? This change order's direct cost is $33,000 on a $10 million project, so it's really a very tiny thing. If I fight with the numbers here, I'm not going to get a whole lot of overall impact on my project. And then this was mentioned before, you can actually send out your change orders individually as bid forms. So you can pop them out just as easily as you could pop out the bid form for the base bid. Change orders that you cost, price, and report on the work. Basically the same as if it were its own standalone estimate. There were a couple questions that came in, so I was going to address those. If anyone else has questions, please send them, and Nicole will forward them on to me. Let me pull up the actual application here. Get this on the screens for you. So this is what Estimate 20.1 looks like. You can see here we're on the Estimate Detail tab of our Foxhole development. This is in our sample database. And I've thrown in a few change orders. One of the questions was, how can I make this change order be named something different? And it's very simple. It's just you go to the change order itself, and I could say, this isn't actually extra paving. This is earthwork. As I click out of there, it renames it. So whatever you need your change orders to be, however you're identifying them. We picked these fields, the change order ID, alternate ID, because these are the ones that Track supports. So when you send this over to Track, these values will all be copied into the change order as it appears in Track. Another question was, how can I see my change orders on the item listing tab? That's where they like to work with their information. By default, the item listing tab will show you the base bid, but if you want to see change orders, you can come over here to filters and groups, and display estimate block lets you change which block you're looking at. So if I want to look at my earthwork stuff, I can click here. And now the listing tab is just showing me what's in that estimate block. That filter also applies over here on the item pricing tab, which lets me see the pricing for those two, my values. I can see what the difference is. And if I do a auto distribute, that'll probably change. Yep, that's down to 49 cents. So those are the answers to the two questions that were asked about how we have change orders set up in B2W Estimate. You'll find pieces of the change orders all throughout Estimate. We tried to make it as comprehensive a change as we could. So for an example, if you go into Estimate Options and you set your bid pricing, you'll see that profit settings can now be set individually for each of the change orders in your estimate. All sorts of areas like that, you'll find where change orders are applicable, you'll have the option of choosing them. Looks like that's all the questions that we have. So I'm going to go back to our screener. If you have any more, please feel free to contact us. And check out our URL here. It's got more information on change orders in general and how we have them set up. So thank you. And I think that brings us to a close.